Hello! Welcome back to another Book Thoughts. This one is again going to cover 3 books at once. The Cruel Wind, A Cruel Wind Omnibus, which is the Chronicles of a Dread Empire series by Glen Cook. Now, I love Glen Cook. I read these a while ago. I just read them again. Just finished yesterday, actually. And I think not enough people have read the series. Actually, I don't think enough people have read Glen Cook, but this is one step along there. So the thing you have to understand about Glen Cook and his writing is that he just wrote whatever he felt like. He was writing for him. It wasn't. He had a full-time job. When he retired from his job, he was a auto worker. He was less bored, so he thought most of his ideas up while he was bored on the assembly line. And when he retired, he got less bored and started writing less. So, this was really just his hobby. So, each series is wildly different from one another. The Chronicles of a Dread Empire series is, I think, a bit different than anything else I've ever really read. So, let's just focus on these first 3 books that were published. The first 3 were The Shadow of All Nights Falling. I'm going to say that again slower now. The first 3 books were A Shadow of All Nights Falling, October's Baby, and I forgot the third one. All Darkness Met. So, what are they about? Well, there's the Dread Empire, obviously. But what are the books actually about? Okay, so we get a lot of different POVs, but really the stories are about this trio of unlikely protagonists, stereotypical protagonists, one or the other. It's very hard to say. You have Bragi Ragnarsson, who is a exiled Viking type soldier, mercenary, who in his youth lost his home to civil war. You have Harun bin Hasif, who is a king in exile. Similarities between the two there. And he has a vast network of spies and a kingdom in exile, essentially. And he does contract work to keep getting resources and connections to one day take his kingdom back. And then you have Mocker. Mocker doesn't know where he himself came from, his beginnings, and he is your thief, your con man, your fast talker, even though he has the unique ability to butcher any language to basically be incomprehensible. So those are our 3 main characters, and then you have other characters who really stay with us through the rest, especially a wizard who has a very long name that I'm just going to call Varth. You'll meet Varth very quickly in the series. Okay, so the 3 books themselves are very different from one another. The first book is very much an adventure story. You have conspiracy layered with conspiracy, and conspiracies intersecting with conspiracies, and all these different ambitions that are all intersecting and have nothing to do with our 3 heroes, but they get all caught up in it for reasons of mostly money. And it's a tale of high magic. It's a tale of individual prowess and individual cunning and that kind of stuff amongst not only our 3 main characters, but really most of the cast. There are very few incompetent people that stay around for very long in this series. There are some incompetents, but they generally don't stay around very long. That book is, I think, viable to read as a standalone. If that's all you're interested in, it very much sets up the next books, but it has an ending that I don't think begs continuation if you don't have interest in where the story goes. Where the story goes is it transitions away from that high adventure kind of thing over to a intrigue based high level political and very nitty gritty military type of fiction. You basically need to look up a map that someone has made somewhere to try to understand how the trade routes connect and why it's so important that this city stays guarded, and why this fortress is in such a strategic location, and who the neighbors of the country that we start looking at in this next novel, again with our trio. It's so you have that kind of very nitty gritty political side of it, and you have like 4 or 5 factions within one kingdom, and then on top of that, you have external factions all pushing and pulling, trying to make outcomes happen. So it gets very complicated that way. Not his most complicated work in terms of fabric of society. That goes to the Instrumentalities of the Night series. At the same time, you have our main characters are all, well, our trio is 2/3 military men. Mocker is not a military man, but Haroun and Bragi both are. And so in this book, when you're talking about the scales of kingdom, they're leading armies. Starts off smaller and the scale grows as you go along. So it's not just the two armies meet in battle and they fight. No, it's very... Glen clearly loved setting up battles in interesting ways. I mean, if you like a Total War type of game where you like figuring out how to flank your enemy, how to pull off enveloping maneuvers, where the best vantages for for your archers are going to be, that's the kind of nitty gritty that we're talking about. Getting down into the tactical on a unit by unit basis. And really, we don't do, in those battles, we don't do heroics, by single men anymore. Bragi's, he's ordering a regiment, he's ordering multiple regiments, a battalion, an army, whatever. That's what's going on there. And we focus mostly on Bragi in that book. Mostly, not exclusively, but mostly. Actually, I think we focus most on Bragi in the trilogy in general. In this trilogy. So that's what these next 2 books are like. They're global in scale. It's a whole continent's worth of political intrigue and battles, and you have to start learning who all the different players are. You have to learn what the military advantages of their particular unit composition is. It's all in the text, but if you're not ready for that, just read the first book. The other thing is that the next 2 books get much, much darker. The setting as a whole is fairly dark. There's a dread empire, for starters. The second is that the way magic is in this series, because magic is a very core component of all of these stories. When we start looking at the magic, you have wizards who open up portals to other dimensions where a being that it's just a mouth, will scoop up and devour, soldiers. Where extra dimensional horrors are called down upon armies, where wizards will make contraptions that will melt the bones out of an enemy soldier, and these are the friendly wizards. Okay, there are unfriendly wizards, and they're worse. It's very, very dark. It doesn't pull punches that way. The first book doesn't really get into it that much. It hints at it, it casts the shadows around, but it doesn't really get into it that much. If that kind of dark magic interests you, that kind of very visceral and very violent magic appeals to you, then I think that you'll enjoy it. It feels like a hard system. It feels like a system with clearly defined rules. But because our three main core characters aren't really magicians, they aren't wizards, we as the reader only get snippets of it, but it feels like a complete system, and I really appreciate that. So one of the great things about this series is a character that you meet very early on called the Star Rider. The Star Rider it's explained very early on, one of the oldest people in existence, and a wizard first class. Like, there's probably no one who can match him. And he does things. He just meddles in all the stories. He sets things up. He unsets things up. And I think, I haven't read the last 3 books yet, but basically the whole thrust of the series is a massive organization of things by the Star Rider. And it's very fun to try to figure out what's going on. Figure out why he's doing it. He's barely there, is what I mean. He's not even really in half the books. He just has a few pages here, a few pages there, and you're like, there's something going on here. So I really, really enjoy that. And I hope that carries through into the sequel trilogy. The other thing that needs to be said is that this is a very dark setting. We already talked about the magic. That's one part of it. Another part of it is the characters. When they take actions, they're always on the side that I think is probably the right side. They're doing right, but they are not good people. They have deep, deep, deep flaws. They're trying to do right as they see it, but I don't know if there's anyone that we spend a lot of time with anywhere in the series that you would say, that's a good guy. The other thing is that once we switch over to the war fiction, when Glen writes war fiction, people die. Lots of people die. Most of the people die. And, you should just be ready for that. It's never cheap. It's never unfair. But a lot of times it just happens. Someone just gets injured in a battle and gets septic and dies. Someone just gets an unlucky hit in battle because they were in the thick of things. People just go down left and right. One thing I want to talk about Glen's writing that I think I find most prominent in this series, especially these 3 books, is normally you have that nice chart of, you have the introduction, and then slowly it goes up in terms of action, excitement, tension, and then you get this climax, and then it comes down, the denouement, and you have your conclusion. With Glen, it's slow introduction. It just spikes almost right at the end, and it just drops. And okay, you're back into the next book, really. I think it works for him. I could see where it could be off-putting, where it could seem slow at the beginning and then rushed at the end. But I think it works. The other thing I want to say is that the last 2 books, October's Baby and All Darkness Met, are both very much one story. So the 3 are, the trilogy is a story and the whole series is a story, but those 2 books, I wouldn't want to read one, take a while, read the second one. I think they need to be read back to back. I don't know why they were separate years, separate times. It was the 80s. I don't know what the choice was made there, but it has the first one has its own build to a peak, a climax, a denouement, but it leaves the door wide open directly to the events of the second book. It begs for the second book. It's conclusion is inherently temporary, with the characters looking forward to the conflicts of the second book. Whereas in the first book, we get to the end and we know that there are going, you can tell, you know that there are more adventures, that there are new challenges facing them, but the challenges brought up in that book have been taken care of completely, as much as anything is taken care of completely in Glen's writing. It's very interesting. So that's really what I have to say about these. I wanted to read them again before I recommended them. I might start recommending books that I'm not that I haven't just read, things that I think more people just need to read, and talk about them. Let me know if you find that possibly interesting, because these videos are the one video type that seems to get traffic of just not my friends just watching my crap. So let me know if this was helpful. Let me know if you think more of this focusing on the fiction. I have a lot of non-fiction, but I know that people are less interested in that. But if you want me to go through my fiction and say, here's what I liked, here's what I didn't like, here's what more people need to read, and go into some details about it, let me know. If there's details that you don't want to know that I just told you, let me know. I'm sorry. Let me know what would be helpful, because if people are going to watch these, I just want them to be helpful. Really, I'm doing this because I want to talk about my books. I love my books. But if people are going to watch them, I want them to be helpful. So yeah, leave a comment. You can subscribe. I don't know how often I plan on doing these, but I'm going to keep doing them. I do other stuff too. My YouTube channel is rather eclectic. And if there is and if you have something to say, comment. That's how I'm going to see it. All right. Well, that's all I have to say about this for now. But I could say much more, but there'd be spoilers, and I don't want to do that to you. So I'm going to end that here. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you later.